Okay, so I'm going to go back to our original loop selector layout and talk a little bit about sequencing and go over the basics of that. Okay, some interesting chords. Yes, maybe we can get to that a little later on. It diverges from our topic, but I'm totally cool with checking out chords at some time. I actually really love the chromatic layout on Push, and I use it all the time because it looks like a guitar. So we'll file that one in for a little while later, once we get through some of this stuff. So sequencing. So we've already talked about how we can layer in our notes just by pressing them in. And you can also delete notes in a very similar way. You just tap them again and they start going away. Now, something you may notice is that my velocities are a little bit lower than they were before. And that is because on my other layout here, I've got this particular velocity selected. So I'm going to bring it back up to, I think this is what I want, right here, so that it's all even to what it was before, back in here. Okay. So another way you can delete notes, which is really handy, is if you hold the delete button and select the pad, it will delete all of those notes in the sequence. So I'm going to hold down delete and delete our hi-hats. And you'll see notes deleted, hi-hat, closed. So that's all gone. Now, if you just got to be careful with this, because if you hold delete and hit the pad and there's nothing in there, I've just deleted the pad. And now I don't have any hi-hats in here anymore. Fortunately, right under delete is undo. And now I've got my hi-hats back, which is very, very handy. So I've got some hi-hats, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw on some offbeat hi-hats. And I'm going to talk about the accent button for a moment. There's Sal. What's up, Sal? How you doing? And when I've hit the accent button, that's going to make every note I input at full velocity, 127. So you'll notice, if you can see this, hopefully, you can see the difference on my screen, that these notes are brighter because Push will show the velocity by the brightness of the note on the sequence. So now my downbeat notes are going to have the full velocity because I had accent on. And we'll play that back. And this helps give us a little bit of a groove there. Accent can be really handy. So anything you put in with accent, including what you play, will be at full 127 velocity. And this can be handy when you're performing, because sometimes when you have the accent off, your velocity in your playing can be very dynamic and maybe almost too much. So that's accent. The duplicate button is also handy when you're creating sequences, because right now I've got this sequence, fairly basic, but let's suppose I want to create something a little more complicated. I'll hit duplicate, and you'll notice on live, I've duplicated that clip, and now that clip is playing. So now I can go in here and start creating something a little more interesting with my new sequence. And I can always go back to the old one using these up and down arrows to navigate between my clips. I'm going to +1 this chords question because I would love to get to that. That sounds like a great topic. I can't +1, but I've got it. So that's using the duplicate button and how we can see, we can make things different. I got a question, my push settings. My push settings, when we go under its setup, you can hold down the setup button in the top right corner and you can see your different workflows, your brightness, my pad sensitivity, my pad gain, my pad dynamics. I keep them all at 5, which I think are the defaults. I never really felt the need to adjust those. So I'm kind of default with that. And it's like kind of a nice even slope. The pads are fairly sensitive, you know, enough where a very slight touch will get me a sound. But not too sensitive where if I just brush my finger against it, I get a noise. So let's see. We were just talking about the duplicate button. And another good button to know here, right next to it or right above it, is the double loop. So it's going to take my loop and just double it. Just like that. And that's very handy when you're sequencing, because now I've got, instead of a 2-bar loop, a 4-bar loop, and then I can go into my other section, for instance, and maybe just throw in some other sounds occasionally. So I can just kind of maybe give myself a couple extra snares, so that on the second 2 bars, you'll see I get a little variation. So that's the use of the double feature. Now, if I go into my 16 velocities, a cool thing is I can actually record in my parts on these pads. So I'm going to hold down delete and delete those hi-hats. And I'm just going to record some hi-hats on the fly. You can hit the record button. All right, we got our pattern here. Now I've got my little hi-hat pattern here. And you may notice that that's not the strongest performance ever, so I can always go to quantize and select my pad, and I've quantized that particular pad to 16th notes. So we fixed that up. So these 16 velocities is a really nice way, and you can see, hopefully, that all of these pads on my sequence are much different colors, and that's because I'm playing all these different colors in my pattern using the 16 velocity section on push. Another nice thing you can do is, and we saw this a little bit before when I was putting in notes, if I have this velocity selected, when I put notes in, it comes in at that velocity. And then when I pick a higher velocity, you'll see the notes are a little bit brighter. So I'm just kind of filling in some of those notes I missed. And you can see you get whatever velocity on the sequence based on whatever velocity you have selected here. And there we have it. Another good thing to know about when you're sequencing is the swing function. So we've got our swing controller up here, and this will affect how our quantize gets affected, as well as the repeat button, which is something I have yet to talk about. So I'm going to, again, delete my hi-hats. Just get them all out of there. Go back to my regular layout on push and press repeat. And what repeat does is let us hold down a pad and repeat notes at the given musical interval. So right now I have eighth notes. I can switch to eighth note triplets, 16th, all the way up to 32nd triplets, all the way down to quarter notes. So what's cool is I can start my beat, right? And then I can go into my repeat mode, and I can just start adding hi-hats like this. And you can actually jump between the different resolutions. This is super handy, like especially for like those kind of trap hi-hats. You can just kind of hold down one pad and then move up and down between your different resolutions. And our swing will affect the repeat. So I got a pretty intense swing going right now. And it almost doesn't really feel so good over this pretty straight beat. But the swing can be used on the repeat. And I'll stop this so you can really hear it. And 100% is like full triplet action. But I find like a small amount of swing can be great, even if your beat is a more straight beat. Just a little bit of a swing on your hats can really add some feeling to your drumming. So maybe I'll just hit play and I'll record in some hi-hats this way. And now I can exit recording, and those are my hats. Just like that.